An astonishing event, one that compelled the German government to draft an emergency report, began when German upper-class seniors, who had spent their lives traveling only to Switzerland and France, suddenly started purchasing tickets to Vancouver, British Columbia. Thousands moved simultaneously. What happened after they set foot on Canadian soil shook the entire German society. In the spring of 2025, employees at a high-end travel agency in Berlin witnessed an unprecedented phenomenon. German upper-crust seniors, usually only interested in Swiss chalets or Mediterranean cruises, abruptly began inquiring about flights to Vancouver. Initially, they thought it was a simple craze for some Canadian pop culture trend, but the reality was completely different. Travel agency staff initially couldn't believe their ears, as a former 70-something minister stated he wanted to experience the Vancouver SkyTrain, and others requested to visit the Granville Island Market instead of a Michelin-starred restaurant. Even more surprisingly, thousands of such requests flooded in within a day or two. They all mentioned one word in common: confirmation. They wanted to personally confirm how systematic and stable the British Columbia Society was. This wasn't simple tourism. It was a socio-research expedition. Former German finance minister Friedrich Schmidt stated that after constant German media coverage of the British Columbia societal systems, he wanted to personally verify if the reports were true. The same was true for his friends. Chairmen of banks and manufacturing companies, as well as university professors, all began planning trips to Vancouver. High-end travel agencies in central Berlin were at a loss. It was the first time since their establishment that they had received such travel inquiries. They didn't know how to handle clients who rejected private jets and luxury hotels but wanted to experience public transport and regular hospitals. The situation escalated to the point where entirely new travel packages had to be planned. Furthermore, the age group of these travelers was noteworthy. The main clients were seniors aged 60 to 80, most of whom rarely traveled overseas. These social leaders, who were considered top-tier even within Germany, suddenly developed an interest in North American travel, specifically the Pacific Northwest. German government officials also began monitoring the phenomenon closely. They judged that the collective movement of social leaders to Vancouver might be more than simple tourism. The German Foreign Office quietly contacted the Canadian Embassy, attempting to understand the situation. The catalyst for all of this was a documentary about British Columbia aired by the German Public Broadcasting Corporation, ARD. The program, titled The Pacific Gateway Miracle, the British Columbia System, became a hot topic among the German upper class, sparking their desire for personal confirmation. Content about BC's digital administration system and the efficiency of its healthcare services garnered the most attention. Germans who watched the program were shocked because it suggested that BC was not only a technological powerhouse, but its overall societal system operated with even greater efficiency than Germany. In particular, the systematic pandemic response and the rapid decision-making structure demonstrated during COVID-19 left a deep impression on German intellectuals. The German tourism industry plunged into panic as reservations to Vancouver exceeded 30 inches just 1 week. Even more shocking was the identity of the bookers. Virtually the top 0.1% of German society was mobilizing. After the documentary aired, phones at travel agencies across Germany rang non-stop. Hundreds of inquiries poured into high-end travel agencies in Berlin, Hamburg, and Munich daily. The reservation list was filled with German societal heavyweights, including 12 chairmen of multinational corporations and 8 bank board chairmen. Former CEOs of Germany's largest car companies, BMW and Mercedes-Benz, were also on the list. Their average age was 68, and most had never traveled to North America. The most surprising thing was their travel requirements. Typically, such clients would demand private jets, top-tier hotels, and private guides, but those heading to Vancouver presented the exact opposite requests. They wanted to fly economy on commercial flights and preferred business-class hotels over ultra-luxury resorts. Even more unusual was the itinerary. They weren't interested in tourist spots like the Vancouver Art Gallery or Stanley Park. Instead, they wanted to visit SkyTrain stations, traditional markets, ordinary hospitals, and government offices. One former minister even requested to personally observe the process of handling civil affairs at the Vancouver City Hall. The German tourism industry struggled to handle these requests as existing Vancouver sightseeing packages couldn't satisfy their needs. they had to urgently develop a new format of social observation tours. The representative of a large Berlin travel agency called an emergency meeting. Employees had to contact Canadian public institutions to obtain visitation permits. Even the guides needed new training, as their main job was no longer tourist guidance but explaining the social system. The Destination Canada German office was also bewildered. Normally, about 2,000 German tourists visited Canada annually, but now the equivalent of half that number had booked trips in 1 month, and they weren't seeking traditional tourism. The German government monitored the situation closely, as the collective overseas movement of social leaders could carry diplomatic implications. The German Foreign Office issued an informal notice to the Canadian government and established a bilateral cooperation system. The most interesting part was the motivation of the bookers. Their goal was not mere curiosity, but comparative research with German society. A former Minister of Economic Affairs stated that after seeing a report indicating that BC's digital government system was 10 years ahead of Germany's, he wanted to confirm it personally. German media also began focusing on the phenomenon. Bild reported with the headline, "German Elites Vancouver Craze," and Der Spiegel ran an in-depth feature titled "German Leaders Learning from the Pacific Gateway." Travel agency employees handling the reservations were surprised by the client's earnestness. People who usually traveled for leisure suddenly transformed into social scientists, constantly asking specific questions about BC's transportation system, healthcare, and administrative services. The moment Germany's highest echelon of power set foot on Canadian soil, their worldview began to shake. For them, accustomed to the chaos of Berlin airports, Vancouver International Airport YVR was an entirely different world. Less than 5 minutes after emerging from the arrival gate, a crack appeared in their German pride. At 2 p.m. on the 15th of April 2025, a Lufthansa flight landed at Vancouver International Airport YVR. It was a special flight carrying the first batch of 42 German upper-class citizens, half of whom were over 70 and mostly visiting Canada for the first time. The moment the aircraft door opened, their expressions began to change. The scene inside the airport completely exceeded their expectations. Huge, ceiling-high glass windows, sparkling floors, and neat, clean interior design left them speechless. Former German Economic Minister Heinrich Müller stopped and looked around. He recalled the memory of years of suffering due to the engineering delays and facility problems at Berlin-Brandenburg Airport, BER. But YVR was different. Everything operated flawlessly. Walking towards the immigration counter, they experienced the first shock. The automated passport control APC system was deployed in full force. Most travelers passed quickly through machines. The system that was only in a pilot phase in Germany was already routine here. Former BMW CEO Thomas Schneider hesitated in front of an automated customs kiosk. He marveled at the interface design, which was easy to use even for a non-English speaker, with perfect multilingual support in German, French, and Japanese. A second shock awaited them at the baggage claim. A giant screen showed the real-time status of the luggage. The conveyor belt spun quietly and smoothly. Lost or delayed luggage, a common occurrence at Frankfurt Airport, was unimaginable here. The service attitude of the airport staff was the most surprising thing. Counter staff answered questions in fluent English, and cleaners immediately sanitized the floor after passengers walked by. This level of service quality was rare at German airports. The internal facilities of the airport also stunned the Germans. Free Wi-Fi was standard, and charging stations and various amenities were fully equipped. Especially the size and brand variety of the duty-free area surpassed any European airport. Peter Wagner, former chairman of the German Banking Association, whispered to a colleague, "I doubt this is really a North American airport." The modernity of the facilities and the efficiency of the operations far surpassed even the highest European standards. Walking toward the Canada Line SkyTrain connection, they experienced a third shock. The escalators and moving walkways extended infinitely into the depths below. All facilities were as clean as new, and the signage was so intuitive that even a first-time foreign visitor could easily find their way. The final shock awaited them at the SkyTrain platform. The train arrived exactly on time. The interior of the car was more modern than Germany's S-Bahn, with spacious seats and low noise. In just 5 minutes, the German upper-class's stereotype of Canada was completely shattered. The image of a developing nation was, of course, gone. Instead, they witnessed a system more advanced than Germany's. And their shock was just beginning. The orderliness that Germany boasts about on its Autobahn paled in comparison to Vancouver's highways. The moment the airport bus entered Highway 99 toward Vancouver, Germany's highest echelon of power, fell into another wave of shock. British Columbia's road culture was completely different from the North American stereotype they knew. Initially, the German upper class on the airport bus from YVR to downtown Vancouver looked out the window disinterestedly. But from the moment it entered the highway, their gaze became fixed. The scale of the distant port of Vancouver visible from the elevated sections even surpassed Hamburg's. Former German Transport Minister Klaus Hartmann pressed his face against the window, observing the port facilities. The systematic arrangement of containers and the organized configuration were in no way inferior to Germany's port management system. They even looked more modern and efficient. The first surprise began as they entered the city center. High-rise apartment communities extended endlessly. This was a rare sight in Germany, but even more astonishing was the systematic placement of parks and green spaces between these huge residential areas. Former Mercedes-Benz CEO Dieter Meyer marveled at the scale of the apartment communities. Huge residential areas accommodating tens of thousands of people were designed as an integrated city. Commercial facilities, schools, hospitals, and parks were all placed within walking distance, demonstrating the model of a planned city. Turning their gaze to the road, another shock awaited them. Despite the heavy traffic, vehicles flowed smoothly and orderly. This sense of order was rare even on German autobahns. Lane changes were systematic and the traffic light system operated very efficiently. Most impressive was the harmony between public transportation and private vehicles. Dedicated bus lanes were perfectly separated and buses arrived at stops on time. Many German cities have not yet established a public transport system of this caliber. Peter Wagner, former chairman of the German Banking Association, whispered to a colleague, "Considering Vancouver's population density, this traffic order is a miracle." Major German cities like Berlin or Hamburg suffer from severe traffic congestion during rush hour, but Vancouver was different. The scene around the SkyTrain entrances and bus stops also surprised the Germans. Citizens queued orderly, and when a bus or SkyTrain arrived, they would yield to those getting off first before boarding. This level of civic consciousness would be exemplary even in Germany. The appearance of the commercial areas surrounding the roads was also impressive. Signage was systematically managed, and the exterior of the buildings maintained a certain standard. This was a stark contrast to some regions in Germany, where cluttered signage detracts from the cityscape. Particularly surprising was the pedestrian-centric road design. Every crosswalk was equipped with audio guidance for the visually impaired. Sidewalks and vehicle lanes were completely separated, and ramps for wheelchair users were everywhere. The standard even surpassed Germany's barrier-free city design standards. The view of the Vancouver skyline at night from a bridge over the False Creek gave the Germans the final shock. The high-rises extending along both sides of the water sparkled with light, organized, and luminous. It looked more grand and modern than the city centers of Frankfurt or Munich. During the one-hour drive from the airport to the hotel, the German upper class's perception of British Columbia completely changed. They confirmed that Canada was not merely an economically growing nation, but an advanced country that surpassed Germany's standards in urban planning, transportation systems, and even civic consciousness. For the highest echelon of power in Germany, accustomed to the outdated facilities and frequent malfunctions of the Berlin U-Bahn, their pride was utterly shattered the moment they boarded the Vancouver SkyTrain. The German public transit system, which they had boasted, was world-class paled in comparison to BC's system. The next morning at 9 a.m., the group of German elites experienced the SkyTrain at the waterfront station. For people who had mostly used private cars or dedicated transport their whole lives, the SkyTrain was an unfamiliar experience. But curiosity overcame apprehension as they wanted to confirm BC's public transport system firsthand. The first surprise began at the SkyTrain entrance. The escalators extended deep underground, and all the facilities were clean as new. This was a stark contrast to the dark and damp atmosphere of the Berlin U-Bahn. Especially impressive were the elevators for the disabled and elderly at every station. Former German Minister of Social Affairs Ingrid Müller marveled as soon as she reached the platform. The entire platform was brightly lit and the floor shone like marble. This was miles apart from the dim atmosphere of the Berlin U-Bahn. The most surprising thing was the guidance system. Electronic displays accurately showed the arrival time of the next train in English and French. Notifications of delays or stoppages common in the German subway were nowhere to be seen. Everything operated with clockwork precision. The queue lines painted on the platform floor also surprised the Germans. Citizens naturally lined up, and when the train arrived, they spread to the sides to let passengers off first. This sense of order would be exemplary even in Germany. The second shock came when the SkyTrain arrived. The exterior of the vehicle was more modern than the newest German subway cars. The sleek design and clean exterior evoked a luxury car. The sight inside the car when the doors opened was even more astonishing. The interior was spacious and comfortable, the seating arrangement was rational, and handrails and safety features were systematically placed. Priority seats were clearly distinguished, and young passengers were seen naturally yielding them. Former BMW CEO Thomas Schneider marveled at the cleanliness of the interior. There was no litter or garbage on the floor, and the seats were clean as new. Graffiti or damaged facilities common in the Berlin U-Bahn were entirely absent. The politeness of the passengers was the most impressive thing. Even when conversing, they kept their voices low. Most were quietly looking at their phones or reading. There was no one talking loudly on the phone or eating, causing inconvenience to others. This level of civic consciousness is hard to find even in German big cities. The punctuality of the SkyTrain operation was also stunning. Trains arrived and departed on time, and the travel time between stations was predictable. Signal failures or unexpected delays common in the German subway were unimaginable. At the transfer station, they experienced a third shock. Despite the complex structure where multiple lines intersected, the signage was intuitive and easy to navigate. German signage was also accurate. The lines were systematically color-coded. This was more convenient than the complicated transfer system of the Frankfurt Central Station. The amenities inside the SkyTrain station also surprised the Germans. Clean restrooms, convenience stores, pharmacies, and even bank ATMs were fully equipped. They realized that the SkyTrain station was designed not just as a transportation facility, but as a living space. Hans Bauer, former head of German Railway, said to his colleagues, "This is not just transportation, it is the result of social education." He believed that the consciousness level of the citizens was more surprising than the superiority of the facilities. After about an hour of SkyTrain experience, the German upper class was deeply shocked. They confirmed a fact: the world-class German public transport system, which they prided themselves on, was a generation behind BC's. And their shock was only going to get bigger. The health revolution. When German healthcare pride crumbled in 2 hours. For Germany's highest echelon of power, accustomed to waiting days for an appointment at a German hospital, their experience at a Vancouver hospital was in itself a medical revolution. Their shock was beyond words as they completed all examinations within 2 hours. On the morning of the third day, an unexpected event occurred. Rudolf Hofer, a former German Federal Bank director in the German group, suddenly felt dizzy and chest pains. The 72-year-old had a history of high blood pressure and diabetes. His companions were greatly worried. The tour guide immediately took him to the nearby Vancouver General Hospital (VGH). Before reaching the emergency room, the Germans were apprehensive. They doubted whether a foreigner could receive proper treatment at a Canadian hospital. But from the moment they arrived at the hospital, their perception completely changed. The first surprise began at the emergency room entrance. The reception staff, using fluent English, understood the situation and immediately arranged for a German-speaking interpreter. In German hospitals, even interpretation services require prior booking, but here it was solved on the spot. The speed of the registration process shocked the Germans. Entering patient information, confirming insurance, and arranging the consultation were all completed within 10 minutes. In Germany, merely confirming insurance documents takes 30 minutes. The efficiency of the computer system was on a completely different level from Germany's. In the waiting room, they experienced a second shock. Even the emergency room facility was as comfortable as a hotel lobby. Clean chairs, bright lighting, and a quiet atmosphere eased the patient's anxiety. This was a complete contrast to the crowded and noisy atmosphere of a German emergency room. When it was time for the consultation, a third surprise awaited them. The attending physician had studied at a German medical school and was able to communicate in German. Even more surprising was the doctor's professionalism. He meticulously checked the patient's medical history and even examined the interaction with medications taken in Germany. The examination process delivered the biggest shock. All tests EKG, chest X-ray, blood work, and CT scan were completed within 1 hour. In Germany, booking a CT scan alone can take several weeks. The test results were also viewable in real time, making the diagnosis process extremely fast. Maria Schmidt, former German deputy health minister, whispered to the accompanying medical staff, "This is not a medical service, this is a medical revolution." She said that even Germany's top university hospitals could not conduct examinations at this speed. The kindness of the medical staff also surprised the Germans. Nurses carefully monitored the patient's condition and patiently answered the family's questions. This was a stark contrast to the cold formulaic response in German hospitals. This was the epitome of patient-centric medical service. Fortunately, the test results showed no major issues, and it was diagnosed as temporary symptoms caused by travel fatigue and jet lag. The doctor prescribed medication and explained that he had chosen drugs that could be continued even after returning to Germany. This level of meticulous care is not common even in German hospitals. At the pharmacy, they experienced a fourth surprise. A pharmacist, upon receiving the prescription, explained how to take the medication in German. The medication packaging even had German labels, so they would have no inconvenience after returning home. This standard of foreign patient service is hard to find even in Germany. They received the final shock during the checkout process. The total cost, including the emergency room, visit, various tests, and prescription drugs, was only a tenth of what it would have been in Germany. Even without German insurance coverage, the price was quite reasonable. At this moment, they confirmed that BC was far superior to Germany in terms of medical accessibility. Leaving the hospital, the German upper class was speechless. The entire process, from registration to discharge, took 2 hours, a speed unimaginable in Germany. Even more surprising was that BC led Germany in all aspects, from the professionalism and kindness of the medical staff and the completeness of the latest equipment to the reasonable cost. Peter Rosenberg, former chairman of the German Healthcare Association, told his colleagues, "British Columbia's healthcare system is a model Germany should learn from." He stated that they had seen the essence of medical service that combines both efficiency and humanity. The digital commerce, when downtown Vancouver's efficiency crushed German business pride. When the German upper class walked the streets of the Robson Square area, they witnessed not just a shopping district, it was BC's astonishing ability to develop consumption into a cultural industry. Even Frankfurt's most luxurious shopping street paled in comparison to the downtown Vancouver hub. On the afternoon of the fourth day, the German upper-class group headed to downtown Vancouver's core commercial area. Initially, they thought it would be a simple shopping experience, but their perception began to change the moment they stepped onto the street. Downtown Vancouver was completely different from the traditional Asian shopping streets they knew. The entire street was designed as a giant cultural space. Sidewalks and sky bridges were wide and clean, and the arrangement of buildings and public art was harmonious. This was a stark contrast to the oppressive feeling of Germany's older commercial districts caused by narrow alleys and irregular building layouts. Joachim Fischer, former chairman of the German Chamber of Commerce and Industry, marveled at the exterior of the buildings. The design, which expressed the individuality of each brand without losing overall harmony, was impressive. Compared to the mixed architectural styles of Berlin's Kurfürstendamm, this area felt more systematic and stylish. The first shock came from the department stores and flagship boutiques. The stores didn't just display products. Each storefront was decorated like a theme park, offering spaces for customers to experience the products firsthand, personalized service from professional consultants, and even complex cultural spaces with small cafes. This was on a completely different level from the simple display methods of German shops. Canadian retailers had elevated shopping to a form of entertainment. They allowed customers to buy not just goods, but an experience. In the clothing stores, they experienced a second surprise. The level of service surpassed even Germany's highest-end department stores. Every customer was assigned a personal stylist who offered customized fashion advice. This service, which is only offered to VIP customers in Germany, was commonplace here. Claudia Müller, former chairwoman of the German Fashion Association, noted the operating style of the stores. They weren't just selling clothes, they were proposing a lifestyle. Every brand had its own unique story and concept, and customers were eager to be part of that story. In the dining establishments, they experienced a third shock. Everything from the department store food court to the high-end restaurants was meticulously managed. The hygiene standard fully met German standards, and the taste and service quality were excellent. Particularly impressive was the unique concept and atmosphere of each restaurant. This was completely different from Germany's homogenized restaurant culture. Dining in Vancouver was a cultural experience in itself. Not only the taste of the food, but also the atmosphere, service, and even interior design were all crafted for customer satisfaction. The most surprising thing was the application of digital technology. Ordering systems using QR codes, real-time inventory checks, and personalized recommendation services were all digitally connected. Compared to German shops still using handwritten transaction processing, this place was 10 years ahead. Thomas Schmidt, former chairman of the German Digital Economy Association, told his colleagues, British Columbia has developed consumption from a simple transaction into an industry. Shopping itself has become entertainment and a cultural activity. The behavior patterns of the customers also surprised the Germans. Young customers compared prices using smartphones, shared their shopping experiences on social media, and exchanged information with friends. Consumption was no longer an individual act, but had evolved into a social activity. The view of the entire downtown Vancouver area from the sky, bridges connecting the major buildings, gave the Germans the final shock. Hundreds of thousands of people moved orderly, and all the shops operated with vitality. Such a systematically managed commercial area of this scale is rare in Europe. The cultural performances and events held in various places were also impressive. The natural fusion of commerce and culture created a synergistic effect. This was a completely different approach from Germany's rigid commercial culture. Angela Weiss, former German Minister of Culture, offered praise. She assessed that BC had created a new form of urban culture through consumer culture. This was not just a place to buy and sell goods, but had evolved into a space for people to gather, create, and enjoy culture. After ending their day at downtown Vancouver, the German upper class realized that BC's consumer culture was not just an economic activity, but an indicator that showcased the entire society's creativity and innovative ability. The emergency report, the moment German supremacy crumbled. When the returning German upper class began to speak, the entire German society fell into shock. These highest echelons of power, who had believed in German superiority all their lives, began to critique their own country. The situation eventually developed to the point where the German government had to draft an emergency report. In early May 2025, the German upper class who had visited British Columbia returned to Berlin. Starting from the airport, their expressions were distinctly different. These people who normally held a Eurocentric view now possessed a completely different perspective, and when they began to speak, they caused a huge ripple across German society. The first bombshell was dropped by former German finance minister Friedrich Schmidt. At a political gathering in Berlin, he publicly stated that BC's digital government system was at least 10 years ahead of Germany's. The German political sphere was stunned, as this came from someone who had spent his life advocating Germany first. German media sprang into action. Bild ran a front-page story with the headline, "Vancouver Shock for the German Elite." Der Spiegel ran a special feature titled "German Leaders Learning from the Pacific Gateway." The Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung began an in-depth report analyzing the BC model. The second shock came from former BMW CEO Thomas Schneider. At a German automotive industry gathering, he declared that BC's public transport system was more efficient than Germany's Autobahn. The pride of Germany, the nation of cars, was instantly shattered. For German economists who experienced daily traffic jams in Frankfurt and Munich, this was a shocking statement. The entire German business community began to stir. Entrepreneurs who had visited BC shared their Vancouver experiences at various gatherings. Everything from the automated system at YVR, the punctuality of the SkyTrain, the speed of the hospital system, to the digital innovation in the downtown Vancouver commercial area was transmitted with specific data. The biggest ripple occurred in the medical community. Former German Deputy Health Minister Maria Schmidt addressed the German Medical Association Congress about the BC healthcare system. When she testified that booking a CT scan in Germany takes 3 weeks, but in BC, all tests were completed within 2 hours, critical voices began to emerge in the German medical community. The German government could no longer stand by. As the phenomenon of social leaders collectively praising BC continued, the Foreign Office and the Ministry of Economic Affairs jointly formed an emergency task force. The goal was to systematically analyze the BC societal system and identify parts that Germany could adopt. In the Bundestag, German parliament, questions about BC rapidly increased. Opposition members grilled the government on how far Germany's digitalization policy lagged behind BC's. Governing party members also demanded immediate plans to introduce BC's successful cases into Germany. The parliament in Berlin was abuzz with BC fever. The reaction of German citizens was also enthusiastic. Following the media's daily reports on the statements of the returning upper class, ordinary citizens also became interested in BC. Enrollment in German Chinese language schools in Berlin and Munich increased tenfold. Reservations for Canada travel packages increased by 500% compared to the previous year. The German government's final conclusion was shocking. The 200-page report, jointly drafted by the Ministry of Economic Affairs and the Foreign Office, was titled "After the BC Experience: Cognitive Shift and Societal Impact." The report officially concluded that British Columbia was not just a North American region, but an advanced societal model that Germany should learn from. The core content of the report was even more surprising. The analysis pointed out that BC was ahead of Germany in all areas: the speed of digital government implementation, the efficiency of the public transport system, the innovation of healthcare services, and the development level of urban, commercial culture. The report specifically recommended that BC should be treated as a model case in terms of civic consciousness and social order. In the summer of 2025, the German Chancellor officially announced a state visit to Ottawa and Vancouver. This was not merely diplomatic protocol, but a research visit aimed at directly learning from BC's advanced systems. The accompanying delegation included ministers from various departments and CEOs of major corporations. A journey undertaken out of curiosity by a group of German upper-class citizens ultimately led to national-level policy changes becoming a historical event. That's it for today's video. If this was helpful to you, please like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'll bring you more meaningful content in the next video.